Everybody, and welcome to a special board meeting of the Board of Education this Tuesday, September the 15th at 7:06. Will you all please join us in the pledge, and board member Celine Lockerbie will lead us in the pledge.
Certainly. Please stand. Put your right hand over your heart. Ready, begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
This is a special board meeting, and so public comments are limited to the item that we're going to be considering. Ms. Huff, do we have any public comments?
There are none.
Thank you. At this time, I'd like to ask Dr. Tarosian, please, to give the staff report for this evening.
Thank you, President Hammond, members of the board. Today we have an action item before you. We have been asked to look into the establishment of learning pods, and would like to present to you our findings and provide an opportunity, once you review it, to determine whether or not you'd like us to move forward and establish them. Next slide, please. Next slide. Just a little bit of background. On August 25th, our expanded learning programs were authorized to operate on campuses during the day. These are the programs that fund our Village program. And it allows us that, as well as the executive order and the public health protocols, allow us to establish learning pods, which are not instruction. They are supervised settings for students who would receive their instruction through a device. Next slide, please. Just as they would from home, by the way. Next slide. It would, just as the Village program is a supervised setting for students before and after school, this would be a supervised setting for students during the regular school day, where students would have their own unique device, their own materials, and would listen to the lesson from the teacher on their Chromebook. We sent out a survey when we heard back from 192 of 192 students who would take advantage of an opportunity like this were it established. Based upon the numbers, we would have at least one pod at every elementary and middle school. Now, we started with the elementary and middle schools and only surveyed for elementary and middle schools because the Village program is only for elementary and middle schools. The Village program has a sliding fee scale. We would recommend maintaining that, as well as the priorities of addressing the needs of foster our homeless students, the children of essential workers, students who are at risk of disengagement, and those who qualify for free and reduced lunch. And so, using a priority system, those priorities would come into play if the need were not matched by the ability for us to serve. And we are capped at 25% of the enrollment of every one of those elementary and middle schools. So if, for example, we had 250 students at an elementary school, why did I use that number? It's really silly, isn't it? We would be able to have, let's say, 60 some odd students in order to, as a cap, right? It would be 25% of the enrollment of that school. Next slide, please. We do have some guidance that we really would need to follow with fidelity. The children would remain in groups of no more than 12, and they and the staff members assigned to supervising them would not intermingle with other cohorts or other groups on campus. They would remain their own secluded pod to the greatest extent possible. We would actually have family members in the same pod. It just makes sense to make sure that they are all together. We would try to extend the environment to the outdoors, again, depending upon air quality at this point and weather. Opening windows is also one of the things that we would do, assuming air quality is appropriate. And of course, masks would be required at all times. Next slide, please. There would be some screening procedures, making sure that we're taking temperature, asking questions, making sure that whoever is coming in, student or staff member, is has none of those things that cause concern. It's not come into contact with anybody who has symptoms or is tested positive for COVID-19. And we would also do these with visual wellness checks as well as students arrive. If somebody begins to exhibit signs of illness during the school day, they would be asked to, well, we would isolate them and call home and ask parents to take them home. Next slide. We'd need to implement a procedure to frequently clean all frequently touched surfaces. Desks would be at a minimum of 6 feet apart and would all be facing in the same direction. Students would be provided instructional materials that are their own. There would be no sharing here. We would stagger breaks if there's more than one pod on any campus, just to make sure that the students remain away from one another and in their own areas. We'd have some strict hand washing guidelines and time signs posted and thoroughly clean every evening. Next slide, please. If we were to do that, we could use the Village program's current online system for registration. We would be able to assign students and staff to Village learning pods, just to keep the parity and the consistency in the language. We'd need to provide training to staff about daily procedures and schedules. There are some really important requirements we want to make sure we meet in order to ensure the safety of students and staff. We finalize the cleaning and disinfecting schedules. And there is a protocol from the LA County Department of Public Health. It's an 8 or 9 page document that says you must do this, 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 and this. Those are the things that we would ensure, train our staff, have the protocols in place, communicate them to both students, parents, and staff members, and it would be a protocol that we would need to submit for approval from LA County. And as I mentioned, these are for elementary and middle school students only. If the board wanted, we could explore the possibility for our high school students, as well as for our staff members whose children are not enrolled in MUSD schools and who perhaps could use this support. So just those last couple are possible next steps. It's really contingent upon the board's will. And if we were to move forward, those others would be mandated. Next slide, please. And I wanted to just circle back and clarify that these learning pods are indeed different and distinct from the specialized cohorts for our special education students and our English learners. And this is the slide, just in terms of our next steps that I bring up during my weekly update with distance learning. explore and work towards establishing those. Identify viable youth sports activities, share the results from our feedback loop. We're hoping to have all that data disaggregated so that we can share it at our next meeting, at least in the summarized version. Finalize our COVID exposure management plan, learning continuity and attendance plan that we brought forth for public comment during our last meeting. Continue to streamline communication and improve it. Board member Gilliland had asked to get us to 100% with Parent Square in terms of access to parents, and we are working towards that. And update relevant board policies, and of course, resume the work on hybrid learning models, because when last we reviewed the hybrid model, it was in a very draft form, and we really do need to revisit it for that time in the hopefully not too distant future when we're able to open up our schools in person. And I believe that concludes my report. Based upon this, we do find that it is feasible and viable to have a program of learning pods for our students. We believe that we can meet the need. We believe that we have the staffing and the capacity to do it, as well as establish the protocols in place in order to maintain the greatest level of safety possible, given an unpredictable situation.
Any questions of Kathy? Ed.
Dr. Therosian, have we looked at how we control the access to these sites so that, particularly if every person that comes on that campus needs to be screened. So I would think we would have to physically limit the access to that point where they can be screened. I don't know if we're looking at temporary fences or have looked at that all, but is that part of the equation here we're looking at?
We have not looked at temporary fences. We can. What we have looked at is making sure that everybody goes through a screening process so that when students are dropped off, we're actually seeing and screening them at that point. So it is at the drop-off point where we're bringing them in. We also have, Parent Square has systems through so that the screening could be inputted through there, and we can maintain that log for all students and staff members.
We certainly wouldn't want somebody coming in the middle of the day and being in a big rush and just walking straight into the campus without going through a screening process.
Correct, and we would keep our campuses closed to visitors.
Right.
Maritza.
Yes, hi. Thank you for your presentation, Dr. Therosian. I'm sure we have quite a few parents anxious to learn more about this and going forward with these plans. But I do want need some clarification on the siblings. You mentioned that if there were siblings that you would try to put them in the same cohort. Let me give you a scenario. If there's a sibling that is at Wild Rose and then an older sibling at Clifton, would they be in the same cohort, or because they're in separate age groups, would they be separated?
And that's where we say we would try to bring them together, because if, let's say, a sibling is in the 6th grade and the other is in the 5th grade, we can move. There's no reason we can't move campuses and keep the children together so that there's one drop-off.
Okay, perfect.
1st graders and 8th graders, we might want to reconsider that.
Okay. So case by case basis there. My other question is, in the event we have these learning pods established and then we move into a hybrid plan, those days that would be home days, would they then be in their learning pod?
We would hope, again, if we were to establish, and my recommendation is that we continue with the learning pods for those families who will continue to need the support, because The classrooms that we have identified on each of the campuses are not being used as classrooms today. So we would be able to continue the program.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Brian?
Yes, I think that learning pods are absolutely something we need to try to get out to parents as some kind of an opportunity. And so my question really has to do on the cost to the families. So if families currently are in the village, would they expect to pay something similar to what they're paying now? And if you weren't in village at all, how would they determine or find out what it would cost them to participate?
Yes, the village program sliding scale would be applied for all students. The fee structure is something that I can bring back next week and present it. This would be extended hours. Usually the village program is not quite as many hours. And so we would develop a fee structure based upon the number of hours participating. So if it's say 8:30 to 12:30 or 1, and then to 3:30, and then again to 6. So we'd need to develop a fee structure based upon that, as well as based upon income.
So will this program, if we go through the village model, have the same restrictions as the village program has as far as the amount of hours that they have to participate in, whether they have to stay the entire day? How much flexibility do we have on this? Have they just said same rules, different times, meaning that we can do it during the course of the day, or they've given us more flexibility than that?
Yes, Board Vice President Wong, you bring up a subject that we all know. The village program, or actually it's not the village, it's the grant that governs it, is notoriously stringent upon the requirements, which they have during this crisis relaxed. So we are able to operate during the school day for as many or as few hours as parents or students would need. There's a great deal of flexibility with.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Celine?
Thank you. Dr. Thorosian, can you talk more about the capacity and how we would pivot and how quickly we could pivot if we discover that there is more interest beyond those 192 students that you have already identified? And I'm talking about not beyond the middle school, not at the high schools for now. So there's a 25% capacity per school. So I think that you had said that translates to about 1 pod per school.
No. I apologize. I should have been clear. In terms of the need based upon the survey, there would be at least 1 pod per school.
At least 1 pod per school. So, so talk please about how quickly you can pivot to accommodate more than those children that we have identified thus far that remain within the capacity.
It would be we will have 4 classrooms set up in advance so that the classrooms are prepared. I know that what we would do is the need would be based upon staffing, and so identifying the staffing for it in advance would be important, as well as if we were to meet capacity, we can always offer an alternate site as well. worry to meet the 25%. We are not fixed on those sites. There's some flexibility.
You mentioned the parent contribution for the Village program having a sliding scale. What if a family can't pay anything? Does it slide that far?
I believe it does.
Okay.
Yes.
When we're talking about keeping the cohorts together, and how we are trying to keep the cohorts together, does that include busing? Will we be offering busing? How does that factor?
We have not yet discussed busing for these programs. We have not even begun to explore them.
So we haven't explored it. Have we not even identified the need for busing yet?
We have not.
So we haven't even identified the need for busing. I won't if that question since we haven't explored it yet. I'm concerned about communication during synchronous learning with a mask on. And so let's look at a scenario where we have a cohort, let's say at Plymouth, and let's say the cohort has Mandarin students and English only students. So if this cohort that is in the pod is synchronously learning, they have a mask on, and the rest of the kids in the class don't. So are they going to be yelling because they've got a mask on? And I don't want to say disrupting, but affecting the other learning. And would we keep cohorts together in terms of language? So, would there be someone, a student yelling in Mandarin in a cohort of English only students? Are you seeing my scenario?
I should also mention that we have purchased headsets for students so that nobody is yelling and they're listening through their headset and speaking.
So they're headsets with a microphone.
Yes.
So they can have that mic right up to their mask so that they don't have to do that. That makes the scenario look a lot better.
They are, and Mr. Bavakin can probably clarify and correct me, but they are noise canceling headphones that we've purchased.
Okay. Now, please talk, if you would, about the adults that would be supervising in the cohort. If they are village staff, and I understand that the cohort is 12 students to no more than 2 adults. So would that be 1 adult with that cohort, or would that for 8 hours, or would that be 2 adults for 4 hours, or something different that I'm not considering?
It would really be based upon their current job. If they are 4-hour employees, then they would probably work 4 hours, and we would, alternatively, if they are 2-hour employees, we'd need 3 adults, but they would be unique to that pod. And
we couldn't have 3 adults.
Yeah,
right?
So that was my question. Could there be 3 adults if they're not at the same time? There can.
Yes, they can. Yes, if they're not at the same time and unique to that pod. Yes.
If they're not at the same time, but are unique to that pod.
Yes.
So they could never transfer out of that learning pod. So we could have 4 adults associated with that pod, but never at the same time, never more than 2 at the same time?
You know, we would probably keep it at a minimum, just to keep into the classroom a minimum number of adults. In terms of the learning pods, the 12 to 2 ratio has not necessarily been discussed. It has been discussed more with the specialized cohorts to have no more than 2 adults. But if, for example, there were a special ed student with an aide, then it becomes fewer students with more adults. So again, 14 is that maximum in the classroom, and certainly we wouldn't have any more than 14 in any one classroom, just to keep the safety and the numbers down.
Just for clarification though, Kathy, we're not talking about special education and ESL right now.
We are not, which is
So-
why the number of adults is at this point, it's going to be 1 or 1 at a time, is depending upon their work hours.
Those were my questions. Thank you for letting me ask so many.
No worries. That's how everybody gets to learn. We have never done this before, Celine. So Kathy, do me a favor, and I'm a parent at home that knows, all I know is I want to participate in what this is. Describe to me what a normal day looks like.
You know, that's something we really will need to do and put together a video in order to envision it. But you would, as a parent, you would say, drive your child up to the school. The child would come out of the car and go through a screening. The person there greeting your child would welcome and ask a series of questions. How do you feel? Take temperature. Have you been in contact with anybody who's exhibited any symptoms? You know, just a series of questions. And assuming that that screening goes well, the child goes directly to the classroom. In the classroom, you'll have desks already set up with the device, with whatever the student would need for class, and greeted by a teacher, and prepare for class at, you know, let's say elementary school at 8:30. So it would be like at home, where you are supervising your child as they are listening to the teacher on the screen and teaching. And then when there's a break, there's a break. And students remain 6 feet apart, but they might want to go outside and walk if there's fresh air. But stay apart from one another. Students would go to the restrooms individually or with an adult supervisor, because we would have additional supervision. Lunch would be brought into the classroom, again, to reduce the number of places, common places where students from different cohorts might come. It may, if it's a beautiful day, there's no reason why not to continue this lesson outside, maybe in the open lunch area and sit there, but have specific places. And then at the end of the day, you go home. There's hand washing in the middle regularly. Before my belief is, and again, I wish I'd listed this for you, but when they arrive, we'd ask them to wash their hands before they sit. Every classroom has a sink at the elementary level. We would have signs posted about how long, you know, and appropriate hand washing techniques. We'd have hand sanitizer available for the adult and for kids if necessary, but we prefer washing hands as that's the most effective. And
So
then,
Dr. Therosian, excuse me, were you done? I don't know.
and then you go home. Yeah.
So if one of the students in the class has if the students in the class have different times for PE, what's then the provision for a student that has to get up and do jumping jacks or get up and use something to play a golf game or whatever the PE assignment is that day? Would they have special areas in the room for that, or?
Yeah, we'd probably have to come up with a way to assign them to pods based upon parts of their schedule. Again, we've not gone into every scenario, but that is certainly something. And that's, again, a middle school specific issue, because at the elementary level, they would have it at the same time.
Right.
Brian?
You had mentioned if we ask the students if they're around people that are showing symptoms, that would be a flag. Now, I just got my flu shot yesterday, so clearly flu season is upon us. What happens as kids start getting a cold, not necessarily even the flu, but they're coughing or sneezing or exhibiting, or it looks like they have one of those symptoms that you mentioned, coughing. What exactly happens at that point in time? If he says, my brother has been coughing, I mean, we don't know what that is. Do we shut down the entire pod that they're in? Just do we put that one child who saw or was around somebody? I mean, this is kind of the nuts and bolts, but I think this is going to be upon us really, really fast. And to avoid confusion, what does that really mean? They see somebody or they're around somebody.
Okay, so if, and again, you're trying to figure out a close contact, right? And so you're asking those questions. And if a student is saying, my brother has had a fever for 3 days and has been coughing, but I'm fine, we'd probably say, you know what, it might be best for you to go home. But we'd call home to find out, is there something else going on? If it can't be explained away by a flu shot, it may be something where we don't know, and we would err on the side of caution. We'll have health clerks trained at every site, but you don't know.
I guess part of my question, I think for an individual, it might be pretty easy to do and say, you need to stay home for 24 hours. But at what point in time or what triggers the closing down of a pod? I mean, does a person have to physically test positive and we get a result of a positive test, or they have a fever of 100.4? What exactly is the trigger to shut a pod down, I guess is my question.
It's on a case-by-case basis, and we would work with the LA County Department of Public Health to find out what happened and who was positive, and has there been any close contacts in that pod. And
so there has to be a positive test in there. That's
what would trigger it. But again, we would call the LA County Department of Public Health for guidance, because we're not professionals in this. We're not medical professionals. We are going to ask for guidance from the experts who are, and provide the information that we have and follow that guidance.
Okay. Thank you.
So
you mentioned, before the kids go into class, they line up, they get screened, they get questioned, they get temperature checked, and then they walk in and everybody washes their hands. So that's going to take some time. Have you considered how much time you will need before school starts so that they're on time for school?
We went through a process to try and figure that out. It went fairly quickly. for 12 students, and we'd have
Were they adults or, or were they kindergartners?
for 12 very well-behaved children. But, it would be slower at first, and it would pick up because as it becomes a habit, it becomes part of the routine. We'd invite people students to arrive a few minutes before class, of course.
You said lunch would be at their desk. How do they get lunch? Is lunch brought to them? Do they go to the cafeteria? And then what becomes of the cafeteria and the food service workers?
So lunch would be individually bagged or prepared and delivered to the pod by the food service staff.
Okay, so that doesn't bring in another adult into that cohort?
They're delivering.
Okay.
They're delivering. They could stay outside, and we can have the
Box dropped on the doorstep or something.
Yeah.
You were answering Brian's question with, if we have a concern, we're going to call home and potentially send the child home. What if the parent says, well, I'm at work and I can't get there for 5 hours? Is this student that we're concerned could potentially have COVID going to sit exposing someone else somewhere for 5 hours, 3 hours, an hour?
And that happens, right? That happens. Kids are with us because parents are busy. I mean, my parents would have needed this kind of support. They've both worked. And you can't always leave your job. So what we have done at each school is identified not only the health office, but a secondary area where anybody exhibiting signs would be asked to isolate and rest so that it's safe for them, comfortable for them, adult nearby, but nobody else getting exposed.
Let me, anybody else have a question? We've used the word teacher and then the word adult, and we've been using them interchangeably as the person who's in this pod. It gives the impression that there's going to be lessons being given there, and that's not the case at all. This is exactly like being at home, except it's going to be on a campus with your contemporaries, with an adult in the room who is playing the part of an overseer. This is not a teaching platform. Is that correct, Dr. Tarosian?
Yes, Mr. President Hammond, it is.
Okay, because I want to make sure it's very clear that this is not teaching. This is supervision. If a person's student is struggling, we're probably going to be able to get them help faster than if they were at home. But the struggle would still continue because it's not going to be a teacher with the child. I want to be very clear with people. And we should probably not use the word teacher and adult interchangeably. We should probably just go to adult, and it makes it a lot more clear. I want the public to know this too. The board is responding to this because we're being requested by the public to help them find a solution. We know that there's a lot of families that are struggling, and because ever since last spring, when we closed the schools, and in preparation, no one ever thought we'd be going through this long. Well, when it became inevitable that this was the direction we were going in, there was almost this sigh that went out, and not only in our community, but collectively throughout the state and probably the country. It's like, oh my God, what am I going to be able to do? Life has been turned on its head. And so this is Monrovia Unified School District's attempt to try to create normal again. And that is having people going to school, having people with other students, and meeting the needs of a big portion of our population that needs this help. And that's what it is. We are providing a service right this minute. And so that's why there's going to be some different kind of paperwork to go on with it. That's why there's going to be some a fee structure that goes along with it, is because this is not your normal education day. There will be learning going on, but it's going to be drastically different than what it used to be. It will probably blend itself into the hybrid that we will be going to, because we will go back to a classroom one day. But we need to provide some assistance to our community soon. There are a lot of people that are struggling, given the fact that when we put the survey out, almost 200 people said, yes, please, I want to be able to take advantage of something like that. That's why we're here tonight, and that's why all the questions and stuff. And I just wanted to kind of not put a bow on the whole thing, but give people the synopsis of why we're here and what it is that we're actually doing. Does anybody else have any more comments or questions?
I do.
Okay, Maritza.
Thank you, President Hammond. In your next step slide that's visible to us, you talk about the cohorts, the specialized cohorts for special education and English learners. Are you working on that congruently as you work on the learning pods? Or what are you waiting for more information so that you can go forward with those cohorts? Kind of, if you could give us a little more information there, please.
You know, we began with the learning pods, and so it's not exactly moving towards synchronously or congruently. They're not parallel paths. I've not been able to focus as much on the specialized cohorts because the learning pod opportunity emerged first, and so we began there. And so the next step for us is to circle back with, there has been a team working on this. I don't want anybody to think that nobody has been working on this. It's just that my eyes haven't been on it, and they will. But I wanted to get one thing done. I needed to focus, and my time was limited.
Okay, thank you. Definitely anxious to hear more about that here soon.
I look forward to presenting it and moving towards providing some additional information about how that would continue. We're very interested in doing that as well, and getting that off the ground. We're really excited to read the guidance a couple of weeks ago that allowed us to do that. And so we have definitely begun. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Any more questions or comments? Well, entertain a motion.
So moved, with the caveat of subject to review of more details that come in.
That also subject to our legal review?
Mm-hmm.
Can you?
Wait. We can't have any discussion yet. We have to get a second.
I want to ask what the motion is. I want to know the wording of the total wording of the motion.
So moved, subject to legal review.
What is moved? I move that
Establishment of learning pods, which is on the paper in front of us.
Right, which is on the agenda.
Subject to legal review.
Yes, that is my motion.
Is there a second? I'll second it for discussion. We have a motion and a second. Discussion. No, just, wait, Brian, are you
Brian, you're
talking?
muted.
Right.
I think I'm always talking, but yeah, I just want to make sure we clarify what subject to legal review means. Meaning not is this legal, because I think we know that it's legal, but are there any other items that we need to address before we move forward? I mean, this is cutting edge stuff. We're doing everything the very best that we can to help the families and students the best that we can. But we're under no delusion that we've thought of everything and have addressed everything. I think what Dr. Throsian has outlined is something that is going to be good for families. It's going to be good for students. And in the long run, I think it's going to be good for our entire school system. But at the same time, I think it's important that we have this outside third party to take a look at what we're doing, to bring up and highlight any areas of concerns that they might have in regards to what we're doing, how we're doing it, or how it could impact this district fiscally. And that has to go also not just with legal review, but with the review of the fee schedule with Village and some of these other things that clearly we need to have answers to before we roll it out, but we don't want to slow the process down, right? I mean, I think the goal of this motion, and I just want to make sure that this is everybody else's understanding, the goal of this motion is to move forward like we are going to do this because this is what we want to do. But based on some third-party reviews, this plan may change in a minor or dramatic way, depending on what the feedback we get is. Is that what everybody's understanding of?
That's my understanding.
That's been my understanding as well.
Perfect. Perfect.
Mine too, Brian, and thank you for your comment, because we don't want anyone starting to depend on this, because there are still some things that we need to know before we actually put it into practice. But I know our intent is to absolutely do this unless there is some catch that says we have to drastically change this. So it's good for people to know that we're moving in this direction, but we're not approving tonight that it absolutely going to happen no matter what.
And the one other item that we didn't really talk about too much, and we kind of brushed on it, was, staffing. I know staff has done, absolutely everything to work with us and how to get things to go through, for the betterment of all. But we absolutely need to make sure that we go from a conversation to a clear understanding of who's going to do this and what the criteria is going to be and the seniority of how this works and everything else that goes along with this. So if there's additional delays, I'm just hoping that the families out there understand, we're paddling as fast as we can here, but we've just got a lot of items and a lot of very concerned people. And we need to make sure that all of the various areas are addressed as the best we can. That's it.
Any other comments?
Brian just said, this is what we all want to do. And I want to be very clear that I want all of our students to get what they need from us. And I understand that we have a vulnerable population that needs these learning pods, but I wish this wasn't what I wanted to do, because I am still very concerned about this virus that nobody really knows anything about. And I feel very comfortable with the work that Dr. Therosian and cabinet and staff have all put in to ensure as much safety as there can be, and putting into effect all of the protocols that are needed for safety. But there's still so much that we don't know, that I want to make it clear that safety is still my greatest concern. So I want our students and our families to have another option, but I want to make it clear that I am concerned about the safety. And I also wanted to say that Board President Hammond very eloquently said that we are doing this because the public is asking us to find a solution. And I'm very frustrated that the buck has been passed to us, because I believe that a solution could have been found at a different level of government, in the form of better addressing the pandemic, different stimulus, better stimulus, job protection, better unemployment, protections for the district, an understanding of our fragile budget, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I am frustrated that the buck has been passed down to us about issues that have health implications and social implications, and situations that should have been dealt with at a different level. I just wanted to mention that, and it's a difficult decision for all of us to make. It's frustrating to have to make that decision, because other people in different higher situations haven't. But here we are. So here we are having to make that decision.
Celine, you so eloquently just stated what it's going to be like to be on the board for the next 2 to 3 years.
Absolutely. Yep.
That is the fact. Somebody, not at the local level, should have done something, and now we have to do it. Exactly. Any further discussion? Ms. Huff, will you please have a vote?
Board Member Gilliland?
Yes.
Board Member Lockerbie?
Yes.
Board Member Travanti?
Yes.
Board Member Wong?
Yes.
Board President Hammond?
Yes.
Motion carries 5-0.
Okay, I need to take a step back on the agenda real quick. Prior to our meeting, we had a closed session and we took no reportable action. And if there is no further business before this body, we will stand adjourned at 7:59. Good night, everybody.